Today's episode of the Gone Fission Nuclear Report is brought to you by Fluor. We're building a better world. Welcome to the Gone Fission Nuclear Report, your one-stop source for all the latest news from the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Program. Now, here's your host, Michael Butler.
Hello and welcome to the Gone Fission Nuclear Report. Today is Monday, November 21st, 2022. We're covering all the news from the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Program across the country. We thank our friends at Fluor for being presenting sponsor for today's episode. The National Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas tells the story of the decades of weapons testing that occurred in the Nevada desert to ensure the reliability of America's nuclear weapons arsenal. The museum has a new addition as the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Office has opened a special EM exhibit at the museum.
Yes, so the original museum, as it was before, we've added this exhibit to it, really gave an amazing history of what happened at the Nevada test site. Whenever they were actually testing the atomic weapons. But the story ended there. It didn't really tell us what happens after the testing. And it's a really important part of both American history and what we're doing today in the Department of Energy. And it's a story that a lot of people don't know about. EM comes from a history of weapons making where we didn't talk about what we did in the Office of Environmental Management. It was a very secret mission. And so now as we go into the cleanup portion of our mission and moving away from the weapons production, it's really important for us to let the American people know this is what we're doing to clean up our environment, to leave the earth a little bit better than it was before we started.
We'll learn more about the new EM exhibit at the Las Vegas Museum later in the podcast. We'll be back with today's headlines right after this from Fluor. EM has completed the last of its major 2022 priorities at Oak Ridge. The latest achievement was completing cleanup and transferring the former biology complex area at the Y-12 National Security Complex. Crews worked throughout the year to remove building slabs and backfill the area. Now that land can be reused to support national security missions. U.S. mayors, EM representatives, and other government officials gathered in Vienna recently for a 5-day meeting hosted by the International Atomic Energy Agency. More than 70 representatives from over 25 countries attended the meeting, which promoted information exchange among communities hosting nuclear power plants and radioactive waste management facilities. Attendees included Seth Kirshenberg, Executive Director of the Energy Communities Alliance, who will be our guest on next week's episode. DOE projects around the country benefit from regular information exchanges in face-to-face peer meetings. One of the most recent involved a team from the uranium processing facility at Y-12 in Oak Ridge, visiting the waste treatment and immobilization plant at Hanford. They met to collaborate on lessons learned regarding turnover, testing, and initial commissioning. EM contractors regularly donate funds and engage in other activities to support their local communities. This week we feature a blood drive at the Hanford site. Wes Bryan, President and Project Manager at Washington River Protection Solutions, donated 33 units of blood during the most recent blood drive. Since 2008, WRPS employees have donated over 2,000 units of blood with help from the American Red Cross Northwest region. This is but one example of the contributions EM and contractor employees make every day. We'll be back with today's Spotlight interview right after this message from Fluor. As we noted at the top of the podcast, the National Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas has a new addition. The Department of Energy's Environmental Management Office has opened a special EM exhibit at the museum. Here's more on this new exhibit, which is telling the story of environmental cleanup at Nevada and other DOE sites.
Well, we're talking with two people today who are very intimately involved with the National Atomic Testing Museum and the new EM exhibit that's opened there recently. And we're happy to have Anita Iacaruso. Anita is the Director of Communications Services for the Office of Environmental Management at DOE headquarters. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. And we also have Joe Kent. And Joe is the Director of Curation, Programming, and Exhibits at the National Atomic Testing Museum. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you for having me, Michael. Appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you. We're glad you're here. We're going to be talking about the new EM exhibit today. That's created quite a bit of interest out in the area there, and even nationally through the social media and other news coverage that it's received throughout DOE and the industry. Let's start by talking about the National Atomic Testing Museum itself. Joe, can you give us a little background about the museum and when it was built and why, and just give us a little bit of the history of the museum.
I'd be happy to. So we were established in 2005, and we're a Smithsonian-affiliated national science, history, and educational institution. And our mission here is to tell the story of America's nuclear weapons testing program and about the current work being done at the Nevada National Security Site, as well as current work being done at various sites from around the country.
All right. And thank you for that. Anita, tell us about DOE's involvement. Why was this museum important to DOE in terms of creating it and the message that it offers to the public?
So the original museum, as it was before, we've added this exhibit to it, really gave an amazing history of what happened at the Nevada test site whenever they were actually testing the atomic weapons. But the story ended there. It didn't really tell us what happens after the testing, and it's a really important part of both American history and what we're doing today in the Department of Energy. And it's a story that a lot of people don't know about. EM comes from a history of weapons making where we didn't talk about what we did in the Office of Environmental Management. It was a very secret mission. And so now as we go into the cleanup portion of our mission and moving away from the weapons production, it's really important for us to let the American people know this is what we're doing to clean up our environment, to leave the earth a little bit better than it was before we started. And so it's important in that regard so people understand the next chapter of the story of what happened after the testing. But it also allows us to say, hey, as you're graduating from high school, as you're graduating from trade school, as you're graduating from college, this is a program that exists, and this is a really exciting mission. We have a lot of work to do. And, come join us. This is a really cool thing that you could be a part of.
Joe, what can a visitor expect to see at the museum, the National Atomic Testing Museum? Before we get into the details of the EM exhibit, what can you see at the museum itself? And tell us a little bit about how many visitors you have every year and who operates the museum and some other background.
Yeah, absolutely. So, visitors to the museum can really experience about 70 years of nuclear weapons testing, along with seeing some of the rarest artifacts related to the testing program. Some of the highlights include our pop culture exhibit that really delves into the early popularity of the atomic bomb and how companies capitalized on that by, merchandising and releasing things like toys and changing the logos to reflect the atom and the bomb itself. So really highlighting that early popularity. It's always fun to see the families come in, both the grandparents who experienced a lot of those or played with a lot of those toys and experienced those early years of testing, but also being able to see the kids and their disbelief of the fact that these used to be, just readily available in stores. So along with that, we also have our Ground Zero Theater, which is a simulation of an atomic bomb going off. So the seats will shake and air will come and hit you, and it'd be like you're actually witnessing one out at the site. So that's a really cool, can't miss opportunity. And then on top of that, we also have a hands-on Geiger counter activity. So visitors can experience what it'd be like to be out at the site, looking to see if there's any radiation out there and maybe involved in the cleanup. So a lot of fun things to do, a lot of great experiences at the museum. And to answer another one of your questions in terms of our visitation, prior to the pandemic, saw on average about 70,000 people a year. And so, yeah, of course, we're working our way back, just like a lot of other museums out there. But, prior to the pandemic, we were about at 70,000 average per year. And in terms of who found us, we were founded by the Nevada Test Site Historical Foundation. That is a foundation made up of a lot of former Nevada test site workers. So people who are very intimately involved in the testing, and their major concern at the time, prior to us opening in 2005, was, as Anita mentioned, just concern about this history being lost and wanting to preserve it and make sure that people knew this story, this fundamental story at the heart of not only World War II, but also with the Cold War and even how it impacts us today. So there was a real concern that this story might be lost if they didn't, create a museum in order to discuss the work at the Nevada test site, but also around the country. So they act as our board of trustees, and they oversee our operations.
Well, it sounds like a wonderful, interactive, and informative experience that visitors would really enjoy and come away from knowing a lot more about that part of our national defense. How did the EM component of the exhibit come about? That part opened in August of 2022. What led up to the decision to have an EM component in the larger museum?
So the EM exhibit itself was actually inspired by a distinguished lecture that we hosted here at the museum in July of 2021. And so the distinguished lecture featured Todd Schrader, who at the time was the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Environmental Management. And he came and spoke about the cleanup work that EM was doing at the various nuclear sites. And so the staff at the time, we were, this is something that we didn't know a lot about. And so because we get a lot of questions from the guests at the museum about what's going on today, what's being done to clean up these sites, that we saw this as a great opportunity to promote the work that EM was doing. And I know Anita, has a story of, her perspective on it. But for us, it really came from that lecture and Todd's wonderful presentation, because it really just opened the door to such a great opportunity to promote this important work.
Anita, can you add more from the EM perspective, from a headquarters look at the EM portion?
Yeah, sure. So, like Joe said, Todd Schrader, who was one of my bosses at the time, is the principal deputy assistant secretary. He went out, did the lecture series. He had a great time there. He came back and he came to me and said, we have this great opportunity. There's this museum we'd like to do an EM exhibit. So every week, I do a history share with our headquarters leadership. So it seemed to make sense for my office to play a part of it. We've reached out to all of our field sites and just started, first of all, saying, hey, if we had this museum, this is really the first of a kind museum where we've included many sites. A lot of the museums around our sites mention the work that we do at this site, but we've not had a museum that's included many of our sites. So this was the first time, and we just started by reaching out to all of the sites and saying, hey, what would you contribute to this museum to really tell the story of where we're going? And we got a lot of creative submissions from our sites. We got things like yearbooks, newspapers. We got personal protective equipment. We have a glove box. So the sites really stepped up to the challenge and really provided those assets that help us tell the story of where we are now in our journey.
Yeah, and Anita, that's a great point, and I think that was what was exciting for the museum as well. We obviously, as I mentioned earlier, talk about the Nevada test site and Nevada National Security Site as it's known today, but we don't typically expand beyond that. We speak about the Manhattan Project and all of that, but we saw it as a great opportunity to incorporate some other sites from around the country, whether that was the Savannah River site or the WIP facility. It was a great opportunity for us to expand on what we have here at the museum. So that opportunity for us was, amazing. We enjoyed being a part of it. So and just to see, like you said, all the creative ideas that were involved.
Well, you had a formal opening for the EM exhibit in August. Joe, can you tell us about that? Who was there? What was the event like? Tell us a little bit about what happened at the opening.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, we wanted to celebrate the unveiling of this one-of-a-kind exhibit. And so we invited guests to a grand opening in August. We had a ribbon cutting and opening remarks by Ike White. He's the senior advisor for EM, as well as an exclusive guided tour of the exhibit, kind of behind the scenes tour that most of the public wouldn't have gotten. So it was a really great way to kind of get them through the creation process. And then in addition to that, we had an array of artifacts and equipment on display, along with a demonstration showing the principles at play in groundwater systems, and even had light refreshments during the guest reception. So it was a great event that brought different people from the community out to the museum who may not have otherwise come. And it was a great way to promote EM, the Department of Energy, and all of the critical work they did, and to celebrate this coming together of the agencies and also our museum.
Anita, you attended the opening?
I did. I attended the opening along with Ike White, who's the EM senior advisor. It's the top leader in the environmental management program. The EM chief of staff came. the communications director, Eric Olds, attended, and I was there as well. And it was really nice to see some EM alumni that I was surprised to see there. It was nice to reconnect with them and see that even after they've retired from our program, that they've been excited enough about it to come back to the museum opening and share in that celebration with us. So it was a very well attended event, a wide variety of people.
Well, you had a memento of the occasion, Joe, that you gave to everybody. What was that?
So we actually gave out complimentary pieces of Permian age rock salt from the WIP facility, which is the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, is what it stands for, and that's in New Mexico. And it's the only deep geological repository for transuranic waste. And the salt that's mined there is from about 2,150 feet underground. And it's actually 250 million years old. And I know that Anita has something she wants to show us too. So
I do. So this is a piece of salt from WIP. I have it on my desk all the time. It's one of my favorite things from the sites that I have. So we asked our friends at WIP if they could send some salt to the museum, give that out, because it's a really special thing to have. Mine is even more special, I think. Some people that went to the opening may have this, but in mine you can actually see, if you move it, you can see the little bubble of the sea salt from the Permian Sea, which would be 250 million years of seawater, old seawater, that is in this piece of salt. And so the people that went to the opening got the same memento as I have.
Well, that's very special. That's a nice remembrance of the event.
well, like Anita said, it's 250 million years old. Like, how often can you get something for free for coming to an event like that? That's something unique and really reflective, of course, as we're talking about it, really reflective of what the museum and the EM, what the exhibit was all about. It was about highlighting the cleanup, and WIP is a big part of that. So being able to give them essentially a piece of the plants and salt from what they were working on is you don't get that from a lot of other places. So it was a really cool opportunity to give them something that was one of a kind, just like the exhibit.
Absolutely. Well, that's very neat. Anita, what do you think is the central message of the EM exhibit? You're a communicator. What do you want people to come away knowing about the EM program when they visit the exhibit?
So I think what we want people to come away with is just that we're here and we're doing this important work. Most people, whenever they think of the Manhattan Project, think that it's over. And when people ask me what I do, and I tell them that I work on what's remaining of the Manhattan Project, I get a lot of surprised looks because this is one program, and especially when you think of the Department of Energy, you don't think of cleanup of nuclear waste. That's just not where your mind goes when you hear DOE. And we do a lot of important work, a lot of exciting work. And so we just want people to know that we're here, we're doing this work, we're hiring. This is a place where if you're just coming out of education, this could be an opportunity for you. We hire communicators like myself, we hire engineers, we hire scientists, we hire budget people, we hire HR people. There's lots of opportunities in our sites all across the country. So that was our message, that we're here, we're across the country, and we're cleaning up the legacy of the testing and other work that we've done.
Well, sort of following up on that, I know EM is constantly working to ensure an adequate workforce, both for the cleanup today and in the future. and there's a lot of emphasis on STEM training. How do you think the exhibit helps with the education process and to generate interest in environmental cleanup as a career opportunity?
Yeah, so I think that anytime that you can get hands-on, it really makes people more excited for the work that we do. If you read about our work in a book in school and you're like, yeah, that's kind of boring. But then when you actually are able to stick your hands in a glove box or see a piece of salt that's 250 million years old, you see the other work that we do at the museum and other places. It's really exciting, and most people say, wow, like I didn't know that was there. I didn't know that that was something I could work on. So it's really educating and then getting excited for the hands-on, which is a little bit more exciting than when you just read about it.
Well, I know, Anita, when we, first started discussing this, to your point, is I think one of the things you had mentioned is that, this information is publicly available. It's on the EM website, the DOE's website. It's out there. But the hard part is promoting it. People may not necessarily think to go there. And so this was a great opportunity for us to educate the public, but also do it in a way that was something that they could enjoy, like walking through the space, seeing the artifacts, seeing the pieces from the various sites in a way that would have been more engaging, right? It's one thing, to your point, to read about it, but being able to go through the space and promote it in a way that is really more of an experience than just simply going to the website. And I know that was such a big part of why you wanted to be involved in it.
Yeah, and I work this every day. I've been in EM for a long time. And so I'm immersed in this type of work every day. And even for me, going through the museum, both what was existing and then the new wing on our program, both kind of gave me a renewed energy, like, wow, our work is really cool. And you don't get that every day, but the museum allows us to share that message that this is really both important and pretty cool work.
Yeah, and I gotta say, we get a lot of great feedback from the exhibit, because it does tie into what we were talking about earlier with the relevant current issues and current efforts of DOE and EM, in a way that they maybe wouldn't expect it. Maybe they're expecting more of the history and the science of the weapons testing, but not expecting more current work to be discussed, which is a great opportunity.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about feedback and what people had to say about the museum. How do you gather that feedback? Do you have comment cards, or just people talk to you, or what's the main way you get your information?
Well, we usually, talk to guests as they're walking through the space. We don't have any comment cards or anything like that available at the moment, but we do oftentimes talk to the guests as they're walking through, whether that's talking to the folks at the admission desk, or if I'm walking through the space, or our STEM education manager is walking through the space, just talking to guests and getting a sense of their experience and what they think of it. And, one of the big things for us and one of the driving forces of this exhibit, beyond the presentation from Todd Schrader, was that our guests would frequently ask us, what was being done to rehabilitate the sites. They would ask us what's being done. That these sites have been affected, and what's being done to clean that up. We got that question quite a bit. And also just what's being done currently, across the country to address that. And so because of this, amazing exhibit, we do get a lot of people coming in and saying how much they enjoyed learning about things that are a little bit more current, a little bit more relevant than just the testing of weapons in the 1950s and 60s. And so I think it surprises them, as Anita mentioned earlier, that this didn't go away. There's still work constantly being done at the sites, and also to improve people's experience. I think for us, a lot of people, when they talk to us, and I think the staff feels the same way, it's also great to hear about how these sites then once they're cleaned up, are returned to the community in a lot of ways, whether as a historic site or as parks. And so I think that oftentimes surprises them too. They enjoy learning about current work, but also learning about how that impacts communities. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I've seen people visiting leave with.
No, that's very interesting. How do you update the exhibits in the museum? Your main museum now is approaching 20 years old, and I know you probably like to keep the message fresh and new things. How do you? What is your process for updating, and how will you update the EM exhibit?
Well, for the EM exhibit, like Anita had mentioned, there's various sites that wanted to be involved, and there's plenty of room to add more to the exhibit. So if there's another site that reaches out and wants to be involved, because to your point earlier, this has gained quite a bit of attention. And so we certainly have exhibit cases that we can add. We can cycle through different artifacts and pieces that we have. And so we regularly rotate the exhibits that we have. That's why we wanted to do the EM exhibit. So we tend to do that year to year. For instance, this is something we'll talk about later, but we have another exhibit in the works for this December. And so, with our main gallery space, there's not a lot that we can do in terms of changing what's in the space. But one thing that we do enjoy doing in order to reward multiple trips to the museum is take out artifacts and bring in the pieces that are in our collection that maybe don't get to be the center of attention that often, and being able to bring that into the space and maybe surprise some people, whether that's a pop culture piece or part of the testing out of the site. It's great to rotate those artifacts in and be able to highlight those lesser seen pieces. And so the best part about the bringing in new pieces and artifacts, and also bringing in new exhibits, is allows us to work with agencies such as EM, various national laboratories across the country, and even the Smithsonian Institution, since we are an affiliate of the Smithsonian. So we constantly strive to make the space interesting, to keep it fresh. And by working with different agencies and organizations, it allows us to do just that.
What benefit do you get from being an affiliate of the Smithsonian? Do they help you promote the museum, or what is the nature of that relationship?
So yeah, one of the big perks of being an affiliate is that they do help us to promote the museum, to market that we're here. It also allows us to get exclusive opportunities to bring in some traveling exhibits from the Smithsonian. And so that's a great, as anybody who's ever been to the Smithsonian can attest, they are a whole different level when it comes to their exhibits. They are, truly amazing, amazing things to see. So being able to bring those in and feature that as part of the museum, I think is one of the biggest perks of being an affiliate, is just getting in there professionally made and really impactful exhibits. We're looking at a few even now to rotate into the space. And so that's in addition, getting some great professional development workshops and classes to be able to grow within our positions. And so really having access to their wealth of information, wealth of expertise, it really helps set the museum apart.
Well, Anita may be able to speak to that a little more, because she can almost throw a rock and hit the museum right outside her window there in the Forrestal building, right?
I definitely could. Well, maybe not me, but people could definitely stand at the Forrestal building and hit a Smithsonian, yeah. And so I've had lots of time during my time that I've lived in DC to go to a lot of the different Smithsonians, and they're all very cool. But I happen to think Joe's in Las Vegas is one of the coolest. So
thank you for saying that, Anita. I appreciate it. It's the whole staff appreciates it. We always say that we're a small but mighty team, and we just we're speaking with some guests yesterday, and one of the big things that we always talk about is the fact that in order to learn from the past, we need to preserve and discuss what took place, whether that's with nuclear weapons testing or nuclear power or the current work being done. That's our responsibility, and it's great to see people leave with an appreciation for that, and especially those like you who work in the field and see the efforts that we're doing in order to make sure that we never forget and that we constantly educate. And of course, it's all about entertainment as well. So leaving them with one-of-a-kind experiences.
Joe, tell us where you're located and what your operating hours are.
Yes, absolutely. So we are in lovely Las Vegas. We are at 755 East Flamingo Road. We're just right near the Las Vegas Strip and the UNLV campus here. And so, people can come in and enjoy a trip to Vegas, but at the same time, also come into the museum and learn all about the nuclear bombs that they tested out in the desert. And then we are open here from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. And if your listeners would like to learn more about the museum, they can look online at nationalatomictestmuseum.org and learn all about what we have to offer, as well as information about visiting.
All right. Now you say 9 to 5. Is that 7 days a week or no?
Yep, absolutely. 7 days a week.
7 days a week. Okay.
Sunday through Saturday, absolutely.
So you're like Las Vegas itself. You almost never close, right?
Pretty much, it does feel that way, but at the same time, though, we get a lot of smiling faces, and that makes everything worth it.
All right, that's great. And the website is nationalatomictestmuseum.org.
That's correct, yeah.
I'd like to ask both of you, Anita and Joe, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you'd like for our listeners and viewers to know? Anything else that you'd like to make sure that we cover?
Yeah, one thing I kind of alluded to earlier, but we have an upcoming exhibit. It's going to be coming at the end of this year. It's titled "The Bomb Without the Boom," and it'll showcase the work being done by the National Nuclear Security Administration, the Nevada National Security Site, and the national laboratories. And really, it's highlighting how they maintain the nation's stockpile of nuclear weapons. And that's done through a wide range of tests and experiments to ensure that they all remain safe, reliable, and effective. Because in addition to the questions that we get about these sites and the what work's being done in order to clean them up, we also get a lot of questions of, especially, with recent events, getting a lot of questions about the stockpile, what's being done to keep us safe. And so much of the work that they do is checking to make sure that these weapons, are usable, are safe, are reliable, making sure that, as a lot of people listening will likely know, the material doesn't go away, this nuclear material doesn't go away, but it may change and the weapons may not work as intended. And so they have to make sure that, these weapons, many of which that have existed for decades, are something that we can count on if we ever needed to use it. Hopefully never, but if we ever did, that they're ready to go. And so, in discussing also how they experiment with different tests to learn more about the nuclear material and to learn more of, learn more of how these weapons work and being able to run some simulations and test all of that. We really want to highlight that because we do really get a lot of questions about it.
Anita, how about you? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I really appreciated the opportunity to work with Joe and his team on the museum. I really I love the museum. I learned so much walking through the existing portion and really enjoyed building our portion. And for your listeners, definitely go to the museum because it's a great experience. But in the meantime, you can go to our website, energy.gov/EM. If you are from a specific state, you can look at our map and find what's going on in your state. You can find out what's going on in other states. We have Site 101 videos that'll give you highlights of each site. If you have curiosity about what's going on at the sites, we have a quick infographic on each site so you can just get a quick glance of what's going on. We also have our Facebook page, and people can follow us on Facebook and get the latest information about what's going on at the sites as well.
And Michael, you won't find anybody that's more of a champion for what the museum does than Anita. She sings our praises all the time, and it was an absolute joy to work with her and the rest of the DOE and EM teams in order to make this happen. And I have to say that for those who have visited the museum and checked out the exhibit, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, definitely go to the EM website, and you can find out so much more than we were even able to include in the exhibit. There's so much there, and they do such a good job of explaining the work in a way that's, is a little bit easier to understand. I think people initially think that this is going to be so above them, but they do such a good job of making it accessible in terms of the information. And so I look forward to your listeners visiting us and checking out the EM page, and just thank you for having us. It was a pleasure to talk with you today.
Well, we're glad you're here. Anita, can you give us the EM website one more time, please?
It's energy.gov/EM.
energy.gov/EM. Anita Iacaruso of the DOE, Director of Communication Services for EM at headquarters, and Joe Kent, Director of Curation, Programming, and Exhibits at the National Atomic Testing Museum. Thank you both for being here today. We really appreciate you joining us. It was a very interesting and informative session, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thanks for having us.
Take care. Have a wonderful day.
Today's episode of the Gone Fission Nuclear Report is brought to you by Fluor. We're building a better world.